I know it's crazy, but
You're watching Channel Z, the world's leading zombie apocalypse channel. Broadcasting live from Studio Z.
Makes me act the way I do.
Good morning, intrepid survivors, and welcome to the Go Bag Challenge. I'm your host, Dr. Emily Zarka. Today we're doing something a little bit differently. I know on the show before we've talked about what you can pack in your purse, what you should have in your go bag, but I think the natural progression, at least for me, is to think about how I can grow my own food, not just rely on foraging from other people's houses or fast food restaurants like Taco Bell. That being said, the last thing that I personally remember eating that I grew myself were some chives and carrots way back when I was a kid in Vermont. So I definitely need some help and I have a lot to catch up on. So with that being said, I contacted Brian Brigantti. He's the lead vegetable gardener and content creator at Redleaf Ranch. Thank you so much for being here, Brian. What monstrous knowledge do you have to share with us today?
Oh my gosh, hi. I'm so excited to be here, and I am going to share everything that I've learned on how to grow your own food.
Yes, thank you. I am desperate for help. I joke that I have a notorious black thumb because I love things too hard and I just want to overwater them or put them in too much sun. So I need your skills.
I am here
So
for you.
thank you. I found you on TikTok. We know it's all about the social media and the digital stuff now. When I was just mindlessly scrolling through looking for some emergency survival tips, and I found your wonderful TikTok account at Redleaf Ranch. And I heard from your story, doing a little bit of creeping, that you moved from New York City to rural Tennessee to start this farming journey, right? Can you tell us a little bit
Yes.
about that and what got you into growing your own food?
Yeah, absolutely. Honestly, I feel like the farming journey found me. I moved from New York City to the countryside of Tennessee in July of 2019, mostly to get away from the hustle and bustle of city life. It was just so overwhelming at that point, and I had grown up in the city my whole life, so I just needed a change. To be honest, I did not really have a plan when I moved to Tennessee. My partner had started a nursery business here growing tropical plants, so I really just wanted to come down and help him and again escape the city. Um, but really, what ended up happening was at the wake of the pandemic, that's what really inspired me to grow our own food with the rising uncertainty of like, where is our food going to come from in the next few months? Because so much was just like in limbo. We really had no idea what was going to happen. So rather than depending on the outside world to sustain us, I decided to take it into our own hands. And we started growing our own food and then sharing that journey. And it just like exploded. And yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I feel like I've learned so much, not just about growing food, but really how to cultivate a healthy lifestyle inside and out.
I think it's so interesting that you're saying the pandemic kind of sparked this journey in some ways because we've seen that a lot across zombified media and particularly with Go Bag Challenge. And I would always joke that when we were in lockdown here, even for like 2 weeks, I wasn't that freaked out because I already had all my food stores. But I think it would have been even more encouraging or at least relaxing maybe if I'd had my own food to rely on as well. But so it sounds like you didn't really have a lot of gardening experience either. What were
I have literally never gardened before I moved here.
So you're completely self-taught.
Completely self-taught. I mean, my partner is actually like a really great gardener, but he's never grown food. He worked more with like perennials and just making beautiful ornamental gardens, but not growing food ever. So this was just like new terrain for both of us. But literally the moment I got my hands in the soil, I was like, wait, I feel like I'm being called here. Like there was something super therapeutic about working with the earth and building a relationship with the plants that I was growing that just made it so worthwhile. And now I'm here like 2 years later and it's like my whole life now.
Love that. Even with my indoor plants, when like a new leaf or something pops up, I get so excited and I'm like, oh my gosh, my little baby leaf.
Yeah, exactly. Like you take care of them and then they take care of you. That's like the beauty of gardening.
But what were some of the biggest challenges or problems that you faced going from this, I have no idea what I'm doing, to the beautiful ranch you have now?
I'd say myself, like the doubt, being like super self-conscious about like doing it right or doing it like the perfect way, but that's really not going to serve you any purpose at all. I find the best way that I learned was to actually literally just get out there, start, put your hands in the soil, put something in the ground, and see what happens. Because the best way that I learned was through the experience and through my mistakes. Because once you make a mistake, you're definitely not going to make it again, especially when you're depending on it to like sustain you, you know?
Absolutely.
Oh,
We
and
have a question from the audience here. Yeah,
yeah.
Pamela's asking, where in Tennessee is Redleaf Ranch?
We are in central Tennessee, Warren County to be specific, growing climate 7B.
I love that you already know so specific, which brings me to what you
Yes,
were saying about
I get
just
asked all the time.
yeah, where you get just trying to plant something. I think can be very daunting, like you're saying,
Mhm,
and I like this idea of just experimenting and trying something.
mhm.
And I know that I live in Phoenix, Arizona, so obviously completely different environment and climate. But I like this idea you're talking about, like digging your hands in the soil. What's the kind of soil that we should be looking for? What's like the feel that you think at least makes for good growing soil?
Ooh, I feel like the darker the soil, the richer the soil. You want it to feel really nice and loose and loamy and aerated. Like if it can crumble in your hand and feel moist at the same time, you got good soil.
That's the goal.
Here in Tennessee, we have like hard red clay. And I am so grateful that early on in gardening, I discovered no-till gardening. Um, like a very traditional form of gardening is like literally going in, tilling the ground, and completely starting from scratch right there. But it's a lot of backbreaking work, and it can actually be pretty damaging to the ecology of the soil. Um, with no-till gardening, all you're doing is opening up the soil, putting a layer of biodegradable weed barrier on top, compost and soil on top of that, and gardening straight onto that. Um, and with that, you are not disturbing the ecology of the soil nearly as much as completely tilling, and you're actually feeding life back into the soil. We started with hard red clay, but every single year, the deeper I dig into the earth, the softer it's getting. Oh,
There's
that's me
you.
in my garden, y'all.
It's
Yeah,
beautiful.
and the deeper we get into the soil, the darker it's getting, the richer it's getting. And that's ideally what you want when growing when growing plants. You know, the looser the soil, the richer the soil, the more room it'll have to expand and grow.
We have some great comments coming in here from the audience. I know Erica's been
Yes.
chiming in with little gardening experience herself, saying cardboard, wood chips, compost, just the best and easiest, and even makes apparently Arizona soil tolerable, like the climate.
Yeah, literally I feel like any soil, if you apply the no-till method, it's gonna bring
You're good.
so much life into the soil. And something else that's really fascinating about it is laying the cardboard specifically, worms, which are like the magic workers of the soil, are really, really attracted to carbon-based materials like cardboard, a paper material. So it was really cool. A few months after laying the cardboard, I would like lift it up a little bit because it hadn't broken down completely yet. And there were so many worms. And it was so great to see because they're the ones that are like tunneling through, aerating the soil naturally, breaking things down, and feeding everything with their worm poop. It's great.
Nature's helpers. I love that. Erica also informed me that I'm in the 910 zone in Arizona.
Oh
So
yeah,
I
it's
guess
hot. It's hot. Which is actually great, because if you cultivate the soil well enough, you can grow pretty much year round. Unlike here, like we get that winter. So for like 2, 3 months, I can't really grow. So I rely heavily on preserving food, which I'm not that great at just yet. Um, but yeah, ideally, if you can grow year round, that's amazing.
well, we're going to return to preserving food, but Jason has a great question here. Can you talk about dealing with pests and how to protect your plants from invasive
Yes.
species without all the chemicals and toxic stuff?
Yes. Oh my God. I advocate so much for never, ever, ever, ever spraying any pesticides in the garden. Because usually when you spray a pesticide, especially if it's chemical based, it's not just going to target that one pest you're going after, it's going to target everything around it. So it can be very damaging to the environment and the overall ecology of your garden. Ideally, the way I deal with pests is companion planting. I plant a really wide diversity of plants. Usually, you know, when a pest invades a plant, it's because they have free reign to do so. There is so much of just that plant that they feel so welcome. They're like, oh my God, we have so many like broccolis around, for example, and nothing else, that there's going to be nothing else around it really preying on it, and it's allowed to be invasive. It's allowed to explode in its population because there's nothing preying on it. Now, when you plant a wide diversity in the garden, you're going to attract a wide diversity of wildlife, and you're going to create an ecosystem. And within that ecosystem, there's going to be a hierarchy of wildlife, from your birds to your critters to your beneficial predatory insects to your pests. And the pests are going to find it really hard to thrive because there's so much else happening around it.
I love that. So plants need diverse friends too, which is a good
Yes.
philosophy.
Yes, absolutely. Humans can learn a lot from plants.
Yes. Oh, we have a great question here from Katie. Out of curiosity, what plant would be easiest to grow for beginners? I'm tired of being a plant murderer. I feel the same way, Katie. What can you tell us, Brian?
The first plant I ever planted was kale. Kale, 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 and it grew like a weed. It was so happy. It does best in cooler climates. So if you start in earlier spring, a very easy plant to get started with. I feel like carrots are actually quite easy too if you have like deep enough soil. And peppers. Peppers can be very easy growing as well, especially in warmer climates like in Arizona. They love the heat. They love, love, love the heat.
Perfect. Well, that sounds like an easy one for me at least. Ooh, Mzilikazi says, how do we garden in the apocalypse? Do we stay on the run
Oh,
or defend the homestead? This is important for you as well, because we've talked before on Go Bag Challenge about the dangers of letting people know sort of where your homestead is. So
yeah.
what is you and your partner's plan? You think
I'm
you're
not
going
going
to
to tell you the city. I'll tell you the county, but I'm not telling you exactly where I am.
That's smart.
I mean, ideally, like we've already cultivated so much love and work into what we have here. I would love to stay. I would not like to go on the run. I will build a fortress
Yes.
around my home before I decide to leave.
I mean, look
Um,
at it. It's beautiful. Why would you not?
Yeah, thank you. So I think, yeah, I would just garden and grow everything here. And we also have chickens, so we have that source of food supply as well. Um, and ideally, if you run a successful homestead, you can create everything you need for your garden on your homestead.
Mm.
Oh, excuse me.
No
For
worries.
example, with our chickens, we use them in our ecosystem.
I was going to
Um,
ask about that. Yeah, because then you can also use the eggshells as part of the composting, correct?
Absolutely, and their bedding, we use pine shavings in their bedding for the coop, and wood chips in the run. Now they live in the run throughout the spring and summer. We let them free range in the winter when the gardens aren't tender, um, and they just like poop on everything. So it's full of manure, full of that richness, and then we throw the pine shavings and the wood chips into the compost. And after a few months, it breaks down and becomes beautiful, beautiful compost for the garden.
I love that. I'm a big bird person. So anytime I know that birds are helping. So plant friends need bird friends. I love that so much.
Yes. Oh my gosh. And
Dang.
one, I would love to like build and get like goats and pigs and cows, because the more animals you bring on, the more they'll be able to play into that ecology of the homestead.
Well, and your philosophy seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's less about trying to force nature to do something and more about cultivating rather than controlling. Like you're saying with planting all these different species and making sure you're working with the soil rather than against it. And I think that's a really inspirational model, especially for
Absolutely.
sustainability.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, you said it perfectly. Work with nature, harmonize with nature rather than fight against it. I'm pretty sure if the apocalypse happens, it's probably because we've been working too hard against nature. So it's probably
Seriously.
time to get on board and work with her, because she'll be surviving the apocalypse, that's for sure.
I love that. Taylor has a question about the peppers. Have you grown any spicy peps?
Oh my gosh, yeah. Last year, I grew a Buena mulata pepper. Beautiful, beautiful light purple pepper. They're very similar to cayenne pepper, like very slender in shape. I don't know why I planted four of them. One plant was fine. I had so many peppers I didn't even know what to do with. And I'm the only one in the household that eats spicy things. So it's like we just had way too many spicy peppers. But I definitely prefer sweeter peppers. This year, I think I'm growing like 12 to 14 varieties.
Oh my gosh, that's so exciting. I think
Yeah.
peppers, and you said you're just getting into the preservation journey of all these beautiful
Yes.
crops, but I know that peppers can be a really great thing to pickle, to even make jam out of, to preserve the seeds. So have
Yeah.
you experimented at all with preserving seeds or other preservation techniques?
Yeah. I mean, if you really want to survive through the apocalypse, preserving your seeds is probably one of the greatest skills to master. Every plant has different ways of preserving their seeds, growing their seeds, flowering. So you really have to build a relationship with every single plant to understand what that looks like. With peppers, preserving their seeds is quite simple. You can literally, once the fruit is pretty mature, I would wait till the fruit gets mature. Um, Fruiting peppers, I feel like, have two stages. They have that tender green stage, and then they deepen in color when they get more mature. For example, the buena mulata peppers that I told you, they would grow that light purple color, but once they mature, they turned a very deep red, and they would be a lot spicier. But once they were that deep red, the seeds inside were definitely mature enough. So then you would go in and harvest those seeds, and then you would throw the seeds in some water, and um, uh, the ones that would grow, the fertile ones, would actually sink to the bottom, and the ones that weren't good would float to the top. Then you would take the ones at the bottom, dry them on a little paper towel, and then you can save the seeds after that. And the
Oh,
seeds
wow.
can last quite a long time. The seeds can last quite a long time.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of work. I mean, obviously, there's the global initiatives for preserving seed banks. I'm sure we've all heard of the one, what, like in
Yes.
Antarctica or something. That's,
Yes.
the secret vault of all the seeds. But I love this idea that it's really just that simple. Wait till your
Yeah.
like fruit or vegetables are ripe, put them out on a paper towel, and at least have your own little mini seed bank. I think that's
Yeah.
really
And a really cool tip I saw just the other day. You know those little like silicone gel packs that you get and things to keep it
yes.
fresh? You can throw that in your seed bank and it'll help keep them fresh much longer.
Oh my gosh, what a great tip. And I'm all about having like even a to go. I have a small Altoid size container that I keep
Oh,
in every
nice.
single purse or bag so I could start a fire, purify water. I have a Taco Bell hot sauce packet in it notoriously.
Oh
Um,
God.
but I
Not
love
the
this
Taco Bell hot sauce packet.
I love this idea. It'd be super simple just to throw in a little baggie with some seeds, the silicone packet, and I could start my own little mini homestead if I had to.
Yes. And I'm always looking to repurpose those little silicone things. I feel so weird throwing them away. I'm
I
like, is this
know.
good for the environment?
So I love it. See, patience, working with nature, working with what we have, and trying to make it
Yes.
all come together. But of
Absolutely.
course, obviously, we need to grow the food to get to the preservation part. So, what do
Yeah.
you think are the necessary basic skills any modern homesteader or gardener should have or should learn?
Hmm. Resourcefulness.
Mm.
I feel like when learning how to garden, there's so many like flashy gardens, there's so many like ways to make it look perfect. Um, and you want the perfect tools or you want everything to be perfect to get it right. And then if it's not right, you can get very unmotivated or discouraged. But you have to learn how to really be resourceful and use what's available to you to make things work. Um, and patience. Patience with yourself and patience with these plants. They're not going to grow overnight. It takes some time.
Okay, patience with yourself is something I know I need to adopt. I once killed a lavender plant in 2 days, which I know is pretty bad. But my
Oh,
husband says he thinks it's because I love things too hard. So, like I was mentioning, I just want to like put too much water in it. But yeah,
oh.
I need to work.
Actually, lavender likes it nice and dry. They're a drier growing plant. I
There
like
you go.
that you
Probably
mentioned that you
drowned
love
before
too
thing.
hard. I love that you mentioned that you love too hard. Loving too hard is not a bad thing. It's just every single plant has its own love language, and you just have to learn
Okay,
what it is so that you can
I,
love it appropriately.
I like that. So, just you need a diverse range of plants because they have their own diverse personalities too. I think that's perfect.
Absolutely.
Well, you
Absolutely.
mentioned tools. What do you think are so if I had to pick only 2 tools to throw in my car if I had to leave my house, what do you think are the 2 most important tools for gardening?
Hmm. The two tools that I use the most would probably be my pickaxe, surprisingly enough. Also very great in an apocalypse, great for zombies.
Yes.
And my sharp edge shears. Very versatile tool for cutting. You can even like use it as your own little like shovel or spade to like loosen up or work the soil. Um, yeah,
I like that.
definitely.
I love the duality of the pickaxe, I think is perfect. And also, again, with your clay soil and with the dry soil here in Arizona, that would be absolutely crucial. I know that we have
Yes.
2 olive trees out in my backyard, and it took a long time to get even deep enough in the soil for them to survive. But speaking of shears, I know we had a question from Erica saying that one of the hardest things for them to learn was the need to prune and trim back plants to make them more resilient to fruiting. Do you have any tips, or maybe even just getting over the fact that you're cutting your little babies?
Oh, I know it might seem hard at first, but it's definitely for the best. It can trigger the plant to fruit and grow more. Especially here in Tennessee, it can get very humid. So having that much moisture building up on the leaves isn't ideal for some plants, like tomatoes, for example, and it could lead to some like diseases or funguses. So you want to prune well to get nice airflow through the leaves so that the leaves can dry. And it also invigorates more growth. And for things like kale or like leafy greens, harvesting often means you're going to get more. Yeah. Otherwise, it's just going to like stay in one place. It'll get too hot. It'll bolt, and you didn't get the most out of your plant because you weren't harvesting frequently.
So the same philosophy for writing, which the notorious saying is "kill your darlings," applies to plants as well, because
You have to make the hard decisions, but it's for the best.
Exactly. So we talked a little bit about climate. So I mean, obviously there are so many different climates and micro ecosystems across the United States, let alone the world. How can we best prepare for farming in our own climates? Are there any tips that are universal, or any resources you have that you think are good for learning about your particular climate?
I mean, I feel like before the apocalypse happens, I feel like it's very good to know what your growing zone is, what your growing climate is, so you know what grows best in that climate. And within that climate, it's also very beneficial maybe to even look around you and see what's already growing in your climate. In terms of like foraging, like there's already so much available to us. So having an understanding of the weather and what grows in that weather is very important. If you are in cooler climates, if you really want to get ahead of it and prepare ahead of time, and you don't feel the need to leave that cooler climate, maybe building a greenhouse or a polytunnel to get like an earlier start on that growing season. Maybe even this one's a little deeper, but a geothermal greenhouse, so you can literally grow year round in colder climates, because with geothermal greenhouses you're actually pulling the air from underneath the earth, which remains at a pretty constant temperature. I'd say around like 50 to 60 degrees, in that range, and you pull that air up into your greenhouse, so your greenhouse will literally never get cold.
Wow.
It regulates the temperature.
I mean, I love that you said that it's about figuring out what you need now rather than during the apocalypse. Obviously, that's the whole point of Go Bag Challenge, is how can we be self-sufficient now while we have the time to learn the skills? We can wander around in our own neighborhoods and environments, talk to one another, or find each other on TikTok and social media to learn before we're in complete panic mode. But Pamela's actually bringing up a really great question here. What about native plants? Do you incorporate any native plants into your own gardening? And do you think that that's an important practice?
Absolutely. As we mentioned earlier on, it's so much about gardening should really be about cultivating what is already there rather than pushing it out, inviting the natural world into your garden so that it thrives the way nature intended. That should always be the goal of gardening. And I plant so many native plants in the garden to help bring more native wildlife, our native pollinators, our native bees, because they help our garden so much. And not just our garden, literally everything. Without our native pollinators, without our bees, the apocalypse would definitely happen.
Yeah. That's so important. Even when you're talking about birds, birds are a huge part of ecosystems and growing food and plants as well. I know here in Arizona, hummingbirds are constantly on all the, I know, I love them. They're constantly working with the flowers. And I think, like you said, even with your chickens and their feces, we don't think about the little steps that everyone plays in the ecosystem, which I think is sad in some ways, but hopefully for people like you and hopefully people like me, you've inspired me that I think there's this beautiful idea of gardening and returning to nature to better understand the environment that you're living in, which obviously has long-term impacts and hopefully maybe will make us more sustainable in the long run. I know I'm going to plant some peppers this spring. You've inspired me. That's going to be my new
And going back to birds really quickly, they're
Mhm.
all part of that ecosystem. The native birds, I feel like a lot of them see them as troublesome because, like, oh my gosh, they're eating my plants or they're eating my seeds. Then plant more so that there's enough for everybody. Inviting those birds in is going to add that extra tier in that hierarchy, in that ecosystem, and it'll help take care of other bugs and other pests that you don't necessarily want in the garden. Um, yeah. It's
I
all
love
about
that.
the ecosystem, working in harmony, working in harmony. I plant a
So
lot of trees to invite,
yeah,
birds in. They love the
that's
trees.
true. Yeah. So if you had to only plant one crop for, let's say, apocalypse has happened for whatever
Ah,
reason, you've only been able to preserve one seed, what crop would you grow for the rest of your existence?
oh my god. Beans.
Beans. Okay.
Beans! I love beans. I mean, I'm Latin. Beans were literally a staple in I'm Colombian and Puerto Rican, so beans were literally in every single meal that I had growing up, and they're so easy to grow. They can preserve and store for so long, whether you cook it or not. And if you don't cook it, you have a plethora of seeds that you can just plant year after year.
I love that so much. And
And I
between
think
your chickens and the beans, I mean, you have your protein, you have your folate, you have your vitamins, you're
I'm
living
sad.
your best life.
I'm sad. I'm sad.
Liz brought up a really great question here. So beans, how do you know y'all's favorite beans? And are there some better crops than others?
This I've been experimenting with. Growing up, I ate a lot of red cranberry beans. Very popular Colombian bean stew was made with red cranberry beans. I grew them for the first time last year in the garden. Absolutely no idea how they grew. Beans have two different habits. Either it's a pole bean, it'll climb up something, or it's a bush bean. This was a wild pole bean. It grew so crazy, so wild, all over the place, and it took a long time for it to actually flower and produce the actual the actual pods with the beans. So I probably won't be growing it again because it actually didn't have enough time to produce everything that it needed to because then it got too cold. Um, so plant things that are more appropriate for your climate. Like I'm planting a lot of black beans now. Um, Yeah, there's just so many different varieties. I love black beans. I always go back to black beans. They're
I
one of the
love
easiest to grow and so abundant.
I love that you brought up your culture too, because I think that's something that we've been exploring this month in zombified media in general is how do our, backgrounds and the even habits and practices of our ancestors contribute to our day-to-day lives in ways that we might not expect. And my husband's
Absolutely.
Greek, so chickpeas are a huge thing
Yeah.
in my household. I'm Irish and Hungarian, so there's not a whole lot of beans in that front. But I think that there's something particularly beautiful about growing something that maybe your ancestors once grew. So
Absolutely.
inspired me there as well. I'll have to explore.
Yeah, and outside of just like the growing of food, in terms of survival, there are so many things that our cultures can teach us about surviving. There's so many things that happened before this like modern era. They had to survive, not just survive, but thrive without modern technology. Like our ancestors are the blueprint. They are the ones that lived the apocalypse before we did.
Exactly. They've went through multiple apocalypses and see, I mean, we're here, so something
We're
clearly works.
here, so they did something right.
Exactly. And I think that goes back to just learning about your environment. I know that here in Arizona at ASU, there's a lot of work being done with indigenous peoples and their practices in many different ways, including their farming practices, because
Yes.
they know the environment better than people like me, my white ancestors do in Arizona, certainly. So I think that, again, this sharing of knowledge is so important in gardening and in every other aspect
Yes.
of human survival.
And one of the greatest teachers that we can have of growing food here in North America specifically would be the indigenous communities. I think someone
Yeah.
pinned a comment about beans, corn, and squash
Mhm.
growing together. That's the Three
Three
Sisters, which is
sisters.
one of the most famous, yes, one of the most famous um, companion planting methods that there are, and it was cultivated by the Native Americans. It's a beautiful symbiosis of these plants. They all help each other grow to their fullest potential. It's great.
Yes. And as someone who studies mythology, I know it's the Three Sisters are deeply ingrained into the mythos, the indigenous peoples and the Dine here in
Yes.
Arizona as well. So
It was
again,
so
this
much more than just growing. It was like sacred. Like
Because food
It's
isn't just love, food is culture, food is survival, and food is what, in a lot of ways, ties us to the world around us.
absolutely.
And I think that's the perfect place to end. So thank you so much, Brian, for sharing your knowledge with us.
It was
Everyone
a
can follow.
pleasure.
Thank you. Everyone can follow Brian at Redleaf Ranch on TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter. So whatever platform you're on, there's a place for you. Brian's also releasing a beginner gardening guide in April. Be on the lookout for that. I know I will be. And with that, we'll sign off here on Go Bag Challenge. Stay aware, stay prepared, and we'll see you here next time on Go Bag Challenge.
It's crazy, but it seems so logical. I can't deny that there is something supernatural with you.